Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I want to talk to you today about beauty, about the importance of beauty, and as designers, how we must try to use everything we can to understand how beauty works. Anyone know who painted this picture, this amazing picture? Don't say anything, Jason. Sorry? Who said that? Raise your hand. Okay. I've got a Rubik's Cube for you later. Solved. The thing about this picture, which is amazing, it's almost 350 years old, and it's a classic representational style. And you look at it and you think, what is this girl with the pearl earring looking at? What is she thinking? What does it mean? You know, Natalie talked a lot about empathy, but this is what we do as human beings. We do it naturally. And there's something beautiful about the way that this picture looks and the way that it actually makes us feel. The Venus de Milo, a 2,100-year-old piece of sculpture in exquisite detail. I love the David Lynch definition of it in Twin Peaks better, the babe with no arms. But it is, this is how they found it. They didn't find it with the plinth and the arms, but they found it like this. But you can see the detail of it. So to think that 2,100 years ago, a human being made this. This is what we were doing 2,000 years ago. Pretty cool, isn't it? David in the Uffizi, Florence. Arguably, many would say, the greatest example of sculpture in the world. Who's seen this? How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel good? Did it make you feel inspired? Let's have a raise of hands if you think it's beautiful. How can those not raise their hands looking at the beauty of David? Shameful. Okay. Okay. What's the name of this picture? Okay. No Rubik's Cubes. So, this picture is called Impression Sunrise. This picture, when it came out, is a Monet picture. It was heavily criticized. They actually thought pretty much that it was rubbish. Okay? And it's incredible they thought it was rubbish because it's called Impressionist Sunrise. The name in the title defines the art movement, let alone how good this picture is. This picture defines the movement itself. And this picture is amazing for many reasons, and it starts to make us think about what this artist may have actually known about how the brain works. Because he must have known something interesting. So, the sun is always the brightest thing in the sky. There could be nothing brighter than the sun, unless another star goes off and there's a supernova, so is the sun. Okay? And see how it shimmers. You think, what does that mean? But if we look at it in black and white, what we realize is that Monet must have understood in detail this idea of isoilluminance. Because when we look at the sun now, it's completely faded into the background, right? Well, from a representational perspective, that's not accurate. Yet when you look at the sun in the color version, it's beautiful and vibrant. And now, in terms of neurobiological investigation, we're starting to understand how some of these things work. Obviously, Monet worked it out over 120-odd years ago. So neuroaesthetics, science meets art. Let's have a show of hands. Who thinks that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? I can't believe any of you psychologists put your hand. That was shameful. Well, it kind of turns out that this idea that has been coming through in philosophy for a couple of thousand years from Plato, with aesthetics being a branch of philosophy, that it's subjective, is actually probably not right. And a bunch of folk called the British empiricists kind of challenged this idea. And they started to question whether beauty was actually in the eye, or whether it was actually not in the eye. Neuroaesthetics is a new scientific discipline whose objective it is to identify and understand the neural processes involved in human art behavior. Those processes that underlie both the construction and experience of art. Construction and experience of art. This is important because as designers we are constructing things. We are constructing things that actually people interact with and experience. But is beauty a property of non-art objects? The Guggenheim in Bilbao are absolutely, in my opinion, uber piece of architecture. I love architecture like this. It kind of demonstrates human ingenuity and design creativity at the absolute pinnacle of where we are as a society. This is like uber. And it's curved. And the thing, as Susan says, we like curves. And it's true, we do. So, psychologists do things like they have experiments and they show you a square watch or a round watch, and it turns that we like the round watch more than the square watch, or a round box, or over a square box. In the box could be anything. But we tend to like curves. Why is it that we like curves, though? Why? Why do we like curves more than, say, we like squares? Yeah. Well, let's explore it a little bit more. Here's another architect that I actually tend to like as well, just because her architecture is crazy, but it's really cool as well. And I debated whether I wanted to show you the inside or the outside of this, because the inside is amazing. This is the Hong Kong Polytechnic, okay, of art and design. This is their building. It's pretty cool, isn't it? I want to go there just to say I've been in that building. It's really, really cool. Anyone know who the architect is? I haven't got enough Rubik's Cubes to give away, but you can get a hug later. This is a metro station in Copenhagen. I love this design. It's the symmetry of it. Someone has thought about this. They've actually crafted and designed this space. So this space is beautiful. I mean, let's have a show of hands. Who thinks that this is a beautiful space? Most of us think it's a beautiful space. That's good. Mount Fuji. And what's good about this and why I picked this photo is that here we have an example of symmetry, because the mountain is reflected in Lake Yahama. This is something that we must have seen for a very long time as human beings, the reflection of things. Something that we are familiar with, something that we would very likely develop a preference for. Cats. This actually is for Emma. I put this in here for you, because I know you're a bit of a cat woman, and all cat lovers everywhere. I love looking at animals, and I love the way that their colours are manifest, and especially shots like this where you look at their eyes, and it's pretty mesmerising in its own right, and we can see how beautiful animals are. Then we look further afield and we think about, well, is there aesthetic beyond planet Earth? Well, this is the sun. This is a kind of great image showing ionized iron atoms being burned up in the solar corona. And it's just, the beautiful incandescence of it. It's just absolutely amazing. Without this, we wouldn't even be here. Then we have this picture of the Earth at equinox time. So it's quite rare because you only see this twice a year where the whole hemisphere is bathed in light. And it would have been amazing if people that were making maps could have had access to this sort of stuff in the beginning. They'd have realized pretty clearly that California is not a separate part of North America. Orion's Nebula, with Orion's belt, 3 stars in the corner. And we look at these kind of images and we try to make sense of them. We try to make sense of what they mean, how the colors work, the combination of things. We look at them and, there's an awe to them, there's a beauty to them. We try to understand them. The Orion Nebula is pretty important for star creation, but it also happens to be the part within the Milky Way galaxy that we are part of. So this is our neighborhood. Pretty beautiful, isn't it? Smeg. Products. Even products have curves. I love this fridge. I love Smeg fridges. I'm trying to get my wife to buy one, but she's just denying me. And here's another company that has, based a lot of what they've done on aesthetics, which is pretty good considering they're the richest, most profitable company in the world right now. So we can definitely say that aesthetics is pretty good at consumerism. It touches us, makes us think about things. Websites. Responsive web design is an aesthetic, just as flat design is an aesthetic. I like to look at shapes, abstract shapes, make meaning of shapes, the way they flow, the way they move. The way that starlings flock, and we see it's nice to watch, isn't it? Or if you've ever seen a video of fireflies flashing, it's beautiful. I mean, really, to a certain extent, we saw, with the synchronicity going on with the 7 brilliant percussion drummers, that there's an aesthetic there. But that aesthetic is observed by us as the audience. If they were doing it by themselves, would it be as aesthetic? It's interesting. Aesthetics is interesting, and I'm mainly talking about visual aesthetics, but obviously aesthetics is more than just visual. It's all senses. So why are some things beautiful? And is it, if it's not in our eyes, it's in our brains, so it's something that we all have. What does that mean about the function of our brains? What is the function of our brains? The acquisition of knowledge. And in this regard, this is something that it cannot stop doing. You are constantly doing it, as we've heard today, when we're on Twitter, or we go onto the internet, or we start browsing and we lose that half an hour. These technologies that we use now allow us to access information 24/7 all of the time. And obviously, because we do it all the time, I think we must like it. We like acquiring knowledge. So this guy here is a first professor of neuroaesthetics at the same university as Yvonne, UCL. And he's pretty inspiring. And I've read most of his stuff, most of his books. And when you read about him, you read about some of the things that he's done. They're pretty amazing. So he's kind of discovered a lot of the visual biology specialization that we have today. So for example, we have cells in our brain, neurons, that are orientation selective. What does that mean? It means this. It's this horizontal line here. There are cells in our brain that will fire when they see a horizontal stimulus in either direction, but not when they see, say, for example, a vertical or a diagonal or a curved stimulus. That's really interesting because The orthodox view has been for a very long time that the site of perceptual processing, where information comes in and how it's perceived, are separate. Well, that doesn't seem right, does it, if we have a cell that can actually perceive, for example, a straight line. What we see is the actual information coming in and being perceived at a cellular level. Pretty interesting stuff. Reinforcing the idea that there's something going on with our brains here that's pretty important in our perception of beauty. Now, I'd love to have one of these machines, but I can't afford one. MRI scanner. And typically we get these sorts of outputs, the kind of brain outputs. What I like is these kind of representations. So what we see here, so we've got the back of the brain, primary visual cortex, and kind of regions through V1 to V5, not shown, but it's quite important because a lot of information comes into V1 and then it kind of cascades out and all these different regions are involved. And kind of people like Zicki, what they're kind of working out is that things like color, for example, we perceive them faster than we perceive motion. Now, from a kind of measuring it in terms of sort of milliseconds, it's not much. But when you think about it in terms of neural time, it's astronomical. It's massive. So there are things that are happening that we do in our brains that we have absolutely no control over whatsoever. What's really interesting about the brain in particular is that we have two types of cell. Star cells, or stellate cells, or pyramid cells, pyramidal cells. And these pretty much are the kind of cells that run through the brain. I'm not a neuroanatomist, okay? And the conversation goes like this, yeah, but we have bigger ones or smaller ones, yeah, but the two same types. Yes, we do, but you can have clusters of them, or you can have less or more. Two types. That's really what we're talking about. Two types of cell. And what's fascinating is that these two types of cell are represented in these 6 layers. And this is pretty much a uniform pattern. And the way it works, in these 6 layers, you have pyramid, 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 star, pyramid, pyramid. Apart from in the visual cortex, where you just have all pyramid. And the thing about it is that this pattern, this folding on our cortex is so uniform that unless you are an expert in neuroanatomy, it's difficult to be able to tell what bit does what bit, because it just looks the same. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, if we got a copy of, we got our eye, and we went straight through the middle of it, it would look very different as we move through it. That's not what it's like with the kind of cortex. It's very uniform. And that's amazing, that these two cells in this uniform structure produces such vastly different specializations in terms of sensation from two cells. So Zicki talks about this idea called brain concepts. And brain concepts are really interesting because they kind of come in two types. There are two types, okay? Inherited and acquired. And, hideous. And with inherited concepts, what they do is they organize the signals that actually come into the brain. And how things work. This thing is saying it's got no power. That's ridiculous. No, it's just, I haven't plugged it in properly because I'm a man. So, two types. The inherited type, they bring all of that sensory information, all 40 billion bits of sensory information into the brain, and they organize it. Everything you can think of. And we have these brain concepts for everything. And then you have acquired concepts, and these are kind of learnt over our life. These are the things that kind of change and shift. You could think of them like fashion. And as I said, colour is a brain concept that is inherited. So, what does that mean? Let's translate that. We can debate the semantics of, say, a shade of red. But one thing you cannot debate is when you see red, for normal vision folk, you see red. That's it. You can't make red in your head become green. You can say it's green, but it won't change. You have no control over this. So colour is really, really, really powerful. And understanding how it works, the psychology of it, and understanding some of the people that truly, try to use it in the right way. So people like Itten and Albers, both pretty uber designers, artists at the Bauhaus School, their stuff is still very relevant today. And then you have these acquired concepts, things that shape, that change, like our attitudes. But essentially, Zeki's saying these two things work together to shape our appreciation of aesthetic. Constancy is another function of the brain. So if I had an apple in my hand and I kind of moved it around, and I moved it over here, and I put it in the shade, and it was a red apple, you'd all say, yes, an apple is a red apple. But the thing is that as I'm moving it around, light's bouncing off it, interference, it's changing it, but you maintain it. It's like if you see something partially. And the reason for that is, the brain is very efficient. It doesn't have to remember everything. It takes aspects of something and represents it. Abstraction. The particular is subordinated to the general, so what is represented is applicable to many particulars. I love that. What essentially it means is this. This idea of a cell that could be selectively orientated for a horizontal line just actually sends that it's a horizontal line and nothing else. Abstracted. Ambiguity. Suzuki defines it in a different way to the way it's defined in the dictionary. A neurobiologically based definition of ambiguity is the opposite. Each one of which is sovereign when it occupies the conscious stage. It's an intriguing comment, isn't it? Let's see what that means. Necker cube. If you look at it, you'll see that it changes, yeah? Everyone see it changing? Yeah? Raise your hand if you've seen it change. Okay. If I put the words front, say, let's actually use a light flasher, because otherwise it could become far too abstract. If I put the words front there, right there, so we're talking about we can use words to control, to influence and all that stuff, yeah? I put the word front there, you'd see it move to the back. Even if I put it big, front, this is the flashing light, you would not be able to you would see it move. It would move. It's not moving. It is an unvarying stimulus. But you interpret it in different ways. And this is what our brain does. It has the ability to interpret things in different ways, and it does this very, very quickly. And as designers, we can use this type of knowledge to our advantage. The Mona Lisa, this is another example of ambiguity. What does a smile mean? Or did Leonardo paint it on there just to annoy us all afterwards? Because no one really knows. No one really knows too much about this. There's lots of theories about it, but no one knows. No one knows what he thought about it. what he did, but it's an intriguing image that has great ambiguity because there's smiles at that point where what does it actually mean? So when we're talking about showing photos, just the way that you could use a smile on someone's face can convey immense meaning. If you want to listen to an unvarying auditory stimulus, you should go and listen to Shepard's Notes. So a really brilliant American cognitive psychologist called Roger Shepard. And what you hear is a change in pitch. It may sound like it's going up or it may sound like it's going down, but it doesn't change. That's a really great example of an auditory ambiguous stimulus. And these things are used as well in soundtracks and pieces of music to convey emotion and mood, to make us feel certain things. So all that kind of neurology stuff is pretty important. I think it's immensely important. And as designers, I would definitely recommend trying to learn as much about it as possible. Why would I recommend that? Does anyone here think that psychology is not important in terms of the stuff that we do as UX designers or interaction designers? Raise your hand. Apart from Danny, we all agree on this. Well, what drives behavior? What drives psychology? Neurology plays a big part. So if you think psychology is important, I also urge you to study neurology in a lot more detail, because there's lots of things in there that help us as designers to actually present information. I want one of these if I can't have an MRI scanner. This is one of the best bits about Iron Man 3. All the user interface stuff, that's the only reason why I watch it, and Tony Stark, because he's so cool. But the rest of the film is like, well, whatever. But this bit, when Aldrich just says, hey, check my brain out to Pepper Potts, and he goes in and he explores his brain. This isn't science fiction. There are people actually trying to do this right now, actually doing these sorts of things, trying to actually represent our brains in a certain way to understand how they work, to better understand our neurobiology. And to a certain extent, this is why the studying of art and non-art objects is important in trying to understand how our brain works. It's not enough to put us in an MRI scanner and say, how do our brains work? The things that we make are part of our brain. They come from our brain concepts. So, pleasure and patterns. Symmetry we like. When we see things that are symmetrical, it actually makes us feel good. We get this kind of dopaminergic region effect. And we know this. So, for example, if you take the idea of abstraction and say, right, with abstraction, you've got information coming into our brains. And that information, if it's regular information, will become familiar. That familiar information actually could be seen as prototypes. Those prototypes that we understand, the better that we understand them, the more familiar they are, the better we feel about them. So, for example, there are experiments done where they take the faces of 200 people, and what they do is they average all those faces into one face. And what they find is that when they rate those faces for facial attractiveness, the averaged face, the prototypical face, is rated as more attractive. Not the distinctive face, the average face. Because, we've got to make our designs as distinctive as possible, haven't we? We've got to make it stand out. Not necessarily. Mental models. We kind of touched on this, and we pretty much have mental models for everything. And I've been a big fan of mental models since I read Philip Johnson Laird's book. That is kind of pretty much the kind of seminal work, or was the original work. And it's a pretty amazing book now. I've kind of reread bits of it as an older man, and it's still pretty brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant stuff. So I now actually think that it is our brain concepts, the way that we actually organize these signals, that actually are the foundation for our mental models. Obviously, I can't, I'm not a research scientist like Yvonne or MC, but if I were, this is the kind of thing I'd want to sort of study. So it's like a hunch / hypotheses. And we have mental models for everything. And I think, everything. So, think of a book and you see a book on an iPad. Susan touched on this type of stuff. We have mental models for everything we can imagine. So you're all sat in here now in these chairs. You know how it works. All those people that have not been to an opera, raise your hand. Okay. So all those people that haven't been to an opera, you have a mental model of what it's like to come into an auditorium. So you've been to a play, you've been to a lecture, you've been in a situation like this before. You take that mental model, and that is what you use to actually guide you if you were going to go to an opera and sit down. It may not be the right thing to do. There may be a bit of anxiety about what you do, what you don't do, etc., the first time. But essentially, you have a model of how it works. You see other people doing it, it's familiar, you copy that. Brain concept. Acquired brain concepts. So I thought long and hard about what's coming up in terms of design and what I wanted to share to you today. And I thought, I want to talk about this thing called cards. There's a kind of name they're giving it now, but it's been around for a while, and it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to get even bigger for all the reasons that I've explained. It's my card. Who, when you got this card, you knew that there would be something on the back, yeah? Anyone discovered that and it was a revelation that there would be something on the back? You know how this card works, yeah? We have like a mental model for cards. We understand cards, yeah? Pretty well. So here's some cards that I've cut. Twitter. I'm addicted to this thing, so my wife tells me. And we've got an iPad version on the right and an iPhone version on the left. Pretty much taken at the same time. But what I want to kind of show you is if you look at them really closely, what you can see is the way that the design is compartmentalized. The way that they are making it easy for people to use this information. Card. Card. This is Twitter. Google are doing it. Facebook are doing it. So we're talking about a lot of people are seeing this stuff on a daily basis. And why they're so good is they allow us to aggregate information and present them really well. They also make it, they're good at making us think about what sorts of things that we're going to show. They stop us from being over-experimental. They kind of they rein back our kind of creativity. And they're doing it really well. You're going to see this explode. My prediction is, if you're designing any type of site, when they say, oh, yeah, we're going to design, we want a responsive website, client, I want a responsive website, you should be thinking straight away, not about grids. And I'm saying you shouldn't be thinking about grids, but I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about it in a minute. But you should be thinking about cards. And you should be thinking about cards is because this is just the very, very beginning of what we're about to design. There's going to be a lot more information out there. A lot more devices that we interact with. Cards make it easy to share this information across devices in a consistent, familiar way that we actually like and understand. Really great book. 101 Things I Learned at Architect School. I learn all my design theory from reading architecture books. Brilliant. They make me think in a different way. And I do that because my wife's a designer, so if I read anything on design, she always says, yeah, but that's not how you understand it, so I read architecture books. It's my way of getting back at her. So we have here simplicity. This is quite familiar, isn't it? People do wireframes like this. I've been in places and they said, hey, this is a wireframe. I'm like, it's 3 rectangles on a piece of paper, dude, but okay, whatever. And then you have this, and this is what we're doing now. This is kind of where we are. This is where we're going. Excessive agglomeration. Because, you know, there's this like fold thing here, and we've got to get all the information up. Get it up. We've got to get it, make it visible, make it stand out. Use loads of color. And then you have this way of thinking. How you can actually start to manage complexity by using very simple shapes, but with equally as many different places. And this is what architects do. They think about space, which is big. They don't define it, as well as what we tend to do is we think about screens, which is really like not a very 21st century way to think about stuff. We need to think like this. This is how information architects think, good ones. And when I mean information architecture, I don't mean site maps and stuff like that. It's like beginner stuff. I mean how we represent and design information to go into space as and when we need it. Love this film. It was one of the... I love it because look at these interfaces. Cards, look at the cards. Obviously, Hollywood know about cards. They're like, right, let's make an interface. Let's make it big. Let's put 1 million cards all over it. Cards, cards, cards. I mean, it's card crazy. I don't actually think this is the way it will be. But it shows us that cards are very good at representing a lot of information with a lot of different views. And anyone that's seen the film and seen the way that the UI works is quite interesting. But it can't be good on her neck, sat there all day. So it doesn't seem so future-friendly to me. I mean, you know, I do what Yvonne did and lie down. I was trying to say lying down, do you know what I mean? That would be much easier. So yeah, this is a very dramatic image, very beautiful, beautiful image, but yeah, cards are here to stay. But will they be like this? I don't think so. So, what I would urge you all to do is to think in what I call a micro-macro way. So we have to be able to dive down deep, be a reductionist, try to uncover what are the actual things that are driving, say, for example, beauty. So we know abstraction, our ability to perceive certain shapes, colors, sounds, smells, exist. How do they work? That's micro. And I also urge you to think in a macro way about the everything, about the ecosystem in which all those micro elements fit. Anyone know what this is an image of? Who said that? You won yourself a Rubik's Cube. That was pretty cool. My home city, which I love, and I love this place as well, Queen Square. I love it because Brunel lived on this square, and if you know me, I love Brunel, the man that engineered the world. It's awesome. He's not from Bristol, but he's our kind of adopted father. That's really, so we need to get down to the ground level to be able to see the behavior. Then we need to be able to go and actually start to understand what drives that behavior. But we also need to be able to step back and look at the behavior of systems, multiple systems. As MC said, there's multiple systems in the human body. We have to kind of understand a little bit about each one of them to understand how they work. Or at least know someone that understands a little bit and actually have some appreciation of it. So if we, as designers, want to make things beautiful, we want to make things aesthetic for our clients who actually really are working on behalf of their customers, their audiences, we need to think about what drives beauty. And I'm not just talking about color, I'm talking about all aspects of it. We have to think about it neurobiologically, and we have to think about it much more holistically as well. We have to have one eye like a Gestalt psychologist and the other eye like a artist, neuroscientist. Everything is beauty, but not everyone sees it. Let's make sure we do. Thank you.